This is David Turner. He works as a software engineer in downtown Astoria. He enjoys his job, but hates his commute. He spends most of his time on the train taking work-related calls, but also loves to look out the window and appreciate the beauty of Astoria. David's daily commute took him to Bond Street Station on the east side of Astoria, where he would often hear the sound of a guitar coming from the sidewalk. The guitarist was a tall, lanky man with long brown hair and an intense gaze. If you're new here, my name's Diana, and welcome to Cascadia Bay, a Cities Skylines series set in the Pacific Northwest. We'll get back to David and the handsome stranger in a moment, but in today's video, we're exploring the east side of Astoria and building up the first train lines in the city, connecting it with downtown. Because space is tight, I've chosen to use elevated rails coming over Marine Drive, which is Astoria's main east-west artery. Being such a dense city on a small plot of land, layering the rail like this over the road was the only logical way to bring in train service into downtown without demolishing multiple skyscrapers. The station I'm using is a large glass station that goes over the road, which I believe comes from Germany. It's beautifully detailed, but I did have to remove some of the existing buildings and move things around to make it fit. But I love how it sits over the street, creating a layered look to the downtown core. I also added in some more smaller buildings and created a nice plaza for people to gather, as I want the central city to be as walkable and pedestrian as possible. And these sorts of spaces are an excellent way to make a dense urban core feel more inviting and alive. Officer James Hernandez had grown up in Astoria's east side, an area known for its high crime rate. He had seen firsthand the problem in his community and always wanted to do something about it. After high school, James joined the police force, hoping to make a difference in his community. Over the years, however, the power that came with a badge began to change him, leading him to become feared by his neighbors as the toughest cop in town, holding people at gunpoint for the most minor of offenses, or sometimes just for fun. The area directly to the east of the Cascadia Bay Bridge is somewhat more affluent than the parts further from downtown, although not quite as manicured. It is a quick subway ride to the Riverwalk area and is mostly higher density condos and apartment buildings that slowly taper off into more mid-rise developments. Although the closer you get to the US 30 freeway, things do start to get a little less well-maintained. Because the freeway was built over 150 years after the city's founding, in a move that was seen at the time as a compromise between the progress brought by the mid-20th century planning practices and the dawn of the automobile age and the preservation of older neighborhoods. Many of the historic structures underneath it were spared, with the highway simply going straight over their roofs. The further east you go, some of the city's oldest single-family homes still exist. These Victorians, dating back to the 1850s, are a rare sight in the urban core, but are much more common in the hills above the city. Much of the rest of the neighborhood is small businesses of varying types, ranging from liquor stores, retail shops, cafes, and bars. East Astoria is slightly less walkable than downtown, but one can still live here without a car and reasonably get all their necessities. James grew up in one of these homes and still lives there on 8th Street between Commerce and Duane, around the corner from Joni's Cabaret, an adult-oriented establishment. His unruly behavior towards the dancers has resulted in a lifetime ban from Joni's, leading him to spend his nights off elsewhere. Letitia Howard, stage name Lola, is a dancer at Adelita's, a gentleman's club on Exchange Street, next to the railroad tracks. She'd moved to Astoria a few years ago, hoping to find a fresh start and leave her past behind. Dancing was the only thing that made her feel alive, and Adelita's was the only place that made her feel like she belonged. This small triangular plot of land is home to many cheap motels, warehouses, and some light commercial and industrial uses. It is the outermost edge of what is considered the urban core of Astoria, before it fades off into the suburbs. Unable to pass a background or credit check for a traditional house or apartment due to her unconventional career, Lola lives in the King's Motel on the corner of 17th and Exchange Street, next to the US 30 freeway. Having never learned to drive, she is grateful to be a short walk away from Adelita's, although walking home at night under the highway can be dangerous. Being so close to the railroad tracks, much of this land is considered undesirable and has been zoned for light industry. Although the land at the very end of Exchange Street is somewhat more valuable, being close to the Columbia River, there's a small middle-class suburb with a cute park where Exchange Street and Marine Drive meet up. On On the other side of the highway is even more warehouses and manufacturing, taking advantage of the easy access to outside connections. David Turner lives comfortably in his top-floor penthouse on 9th Street, just a couple blocks walk from Bond Street Station, where he first became infatuated with the handsome guitarist. Every morning, he waits at the station for his train to work downtown, hoping for another chance encounter. The elevated train station asset that I'm using is modeled after those in New York City and perfectly reflects the somewhat gritty atmosphere of East Astoria. In keeping with responsible transit-oriented planning practices, the majority of structures near Bond Street Station are high density with a mix of uses and incomes. The overall feel I'm going for this small collection of blocks is somewhat reminiscent of Brooklyn or the denser parts of Queens, and I've been deliberate in choosing architecture that reflects that. Jacob Blake, affectionately known as Jake by his friends, had always wanted to be a professional musician. Having grown up in a wealthy but unsupportive household in Utah, his conservative Mormon parents, disapproving of his alternative lifestyle, set up a trust fund for him, while also giving him an ultimatum to leave town and never speak to them again. Initially having moved to Astoria with his high school best friend and songwriting partner Kaylee, the two recently had some creative differences and went their separate ways. His trust fund has given him the ability to focus on his music. A few nights ago, outside 14th Street subway station, he had his first of many encounters with Officer Hernandez, being cited for loitering and disturbing the peace. The area Jake lives in is known as Franklin Heights. It is a slightly more affluent and suburban area in the hills just above the US 30 freeway. In contrast to the much more working-class neighborhoods just a few blocks to the north, much of it is beautifully preserved historic homes and some offices. The terrain in this area is quite steep and offers beautiful views of the entire region. The architecture in Franklin Heights is somewhat reminiscent of the older residential neighborhoods of San Francisco, having been built around the same time that the city was founded. Being taken care of financially by his parents, despite their demanding that he leave his hometown of Saltaire, he was able to rent a nice house for himself on Franklin Avenue, near 4th Street. He often practices guitar in his backyard, and when he's not out playing in the streets for tips, he hosts concerts in his yard for his community. These events have been quite popular with folks from all parts of East Astoria. 14th Street Station is the nearest high-traffic transit stop to Jacob's house, and prior to getting run out by the cops, he would go there quite often. A few mornings ago, he had taken his act over to Bond Street, and while outside, a handsome professional caught his eye. But sadly, he did not get the man's name. Thinking of this encounter with fondness, he figured he'd pay a visit to the station before evening rush hour. Waiting on the platform, playing his guitar as always. On his commute home, David couldn't help but wonder if today would be the day he'd encounter the handsome guitarist again. Much to his surprise, as he got off the train, he heard a familiar song. Besides dancing, Lola had a passion for music. Sometimes she would walk to the Starbucks on Marine Drive near the waterfront and sing a cappella for tips. It's here she first formally met James when he was called to investigate a noise complaint. She had noticed him in the crowd at Adelita's many nights before, not knowing that he'd secretly been following her. James's precinct was around the corner at 14th and Bond, the waterfront being a part of his regular patrol route. Astor Street is the wealthiest street in all of East Astoria, with a yacht club and many luxury condo buildings. Thinking she'd earn more tips catering to a wealthier audience, Lolo frequented the waterfront often. But time and time again, she was a victim of prejudice and discrimination by locals, who treated her with suspicion because of her racial and socioeconomic background. When James was called to respond to a complaint, he made a deal with Lola. She wouldn't go to jail if he could come home with her for the night. She reluctantly complied. Because she doesn't have a car, Lola relies on Astoria's robust network of trams, subways, trains, and walkable streets to get from place to place. Earlier in the day, she'd met a friend for lunch at Chico's Tacos, where he told her of an event going on in Franklin Heights. An open mic. This was her chance to be heard. As she approached the house, she saw a man playing guitar and walked up to the stage and started singing. The man gave her an approving look, and the two kept going to the delight of the crowd. David's job in downtown kept him late that night. Having finally met Jake, he'd been invited out to see a performance at his house in Franklin Heights. Anxiously, he rushed to the train station, trying to call Jake's phone, only for it to go straight to voicemail. When he finally arrived, he saw Jake and Lola playing together, and was in awe of their performance. As the two finished, he cheered and confessed his attraction to Jake. It was just then that Officer Hernandez arrived, looking for Lola. He had followed her to this house on Franklin Avenue and went in, gun in hand. I'll leave it up to you all to determine what happens next, so please let me know in the comments where we should take this story from here. And in the meantime, check out Jacob's hometown, the city of Saltaire. I think this episode's the best place to start, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more episodes of Cascadia Bay.